it's a pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Virgil Elings, who probably prefers to be referred to as the unemployed farm boy.
Lavender farm.
But since then he's done a lot of remarkable things, many of which we all would dream of doing. He's taken the exciting parts of science and technology and taken that and had years of fun to bring to life things that only a few of us could dream about. Plus, he made a lot of money doing it. The one thing that is true about his own personal introduction is that he is from Des Moines, Iowa, and then it stops there. And he's currently unemployed. He did his master's degree work at Iowa State, where he majored in mechanical engineering, and then from there he went to MIT, where he was a physics Ph.D. student of Louis Osborne. And probably most notably at MIT is where he started to get a reputation for causing trouble, which has continued. There was a street in Cambridge called Ames Street, which is a nice place to drag race motorcycles. And we thought we were the first ones doing it, but in fact, Virgil had paved the road for us, and the police knew where to place themselves because of Virgil preceding us and racing down Ames Street on motorcycles. He did manage to get a Ph.D. in spite of all his own efforts, and moved to Santa Barbara to join the faculty in 1967, I guess. And he was on the faculty for 20 years before taking leave and starting Digital Instruments, and during that time he caused trouble here, apparently. He caused trouble with the faculty trying to start programs that seemed to be against academia, in the sense that people were doing things that were practical and interesting to people and companies. And finally I think he got a little fed up with it and left in 1987 to do it himself and founded Digital Instruments. There at Digital Instruments, he really did something that was quite remarkable. He assembled a team of people, that probably the best people on earth, to commercialize scanning probe microscopy and create a technology that is really second to none, and seemed to have had a lot of fun doing it. Subsequently, he's gone into a different stage of his life, and we'll hear about it tonight. But Virgil, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for the introduction. Eric is supposed to be here to moderate me in case I start swearing. Something like that. Let's see, the title, my title used to be You Can't Know What You're Doing, but people didn't like that title, so I've changed the title to Look at the Big Picture. You'll probably notice the talk looks pretty much the same, but the title's different. The big picture, there are two examples that come to mind. One is I got a package for Christmas one time from my brother that was on the front porch when I came home, and I was in a hurry, and I saw a refrigerator on the package, and I ran and threw it in the refrigerator. And a week later I got it out to see what he'd sent me from Oregon, and what did the package really say? Do not refrigerate. And I missed the big picture, because as soon as I saw refrigerate, I knew the answer. I know the answer. Refrigerate. Who the hell would put do not refrigerate? Anyway. But that's just a standard thing in life. You don't see the big picture because you know the answer, and there's no reason to look any further, because you know the answer. There's no reason to look any further. That's a common thing in life. The other thing is this joke in which somebody's asking for someone to tell him a secret, and he says, I can tell you, but I'll have to kill you. Well, this is a joke because you're told the big picture, and it turns out in life you're not told the big picture. And in this case, there's another example there that sometimes for when you're looking for the upside, there's a downside, and the downside's bigger than the upside. People don't look for the downside, though, so they miss quite a bit. We'll get to some examples. We'll put this in the context of management, which somehow this is a management program. I don't like that word. Anyway, The big picture in management, from what I've seen in business, and I was in business not very long, 10 years, but I was able to observe lots of other businessmen, typically competitors that we were putting out of business. And I found them interesting, but typically the big picture to them was you do planning, you sit down, you think about whatever it is that you want to do, you get straight what you're going to do. For the next 5 years, by the way, you're going to plan it out. And then after that, you do execution. Well, the execution now takes 5 years, and so you spend most of your time executing the plan. And so the big picture is that you organize in order to do the plan. You'll have weekly meetings to keep people on the same page. You do schedules. You work as a team, make sure we're all team players. No negative input, can't have negative input to the plan. And we'll be successful. And this thing will all work very well, somewhat like our federal government does. And we'll just get right to this plan that we've got. What do you want for people to do that? You want people with experience. You want people that can do planning, experience, and then you want people that are good at executing the plan. People that are organized. They can have organization charts. They can decide who tells whom what to do and how to do it and what to do. And this is the big picture. My feeling is this isn't the big picture. It turns out I think you would get a better feel for what you're doing if you would change the name of these planning meetings to guessing the future, because that's what it is. And the picture in your mind would go from these scientific guys figuring things out to the lady at the carnival sitting in front of a crystal ball. Those things are exactly the same. The gal with the crystal ball is probably more accurate because she's got you meeting tall strangers, and that happens within 5 years, whereas this other plan will rarely happen. And the problem is that you can't guess the future very well. And so the big picture is that plan almost always is a bunch of crap. And you're unwilling to believe that because you think you're smart, and you're not smart. Nonetheless, the big picture is the plan is a bunch of crap. And so the executing of the crap makes it even worse. And in fact, to stay on the same page with all these people is horrible. And no negative input. You mean if some guy noticed that we're doing crap, that he, hello, we're doing crap. None of that. And so it's the whole business is typically organized that the plan is right. And my observation is the plan is wrong. If you take that for granted, which is what we did at Digital Instruments, that whatever you plan is probably not the good plan, take it for granted, truly believe that, then the big picture requires now that the kind of people you hire are smart people, because what we're going to be looking for is where we're wrong, not where we're right. We're not going to be looking for people who are right because they're following a plan. We want people who are finding out what we're doing wrong and what's better. And that doesn't mean we want experience, because those experienced guys aren't worth anything now, because they've been following plans too long. So you want smart guys, but I think on top of that you want a culture. You want a culture in which things are questioned, but you're able to question things without any jeopardizing your job or anything. In my case, you could come and tell me I'm full of crap. You used to do that. And it turns out it was okay because there were a couple of us that own the business, and so whether we're full of crap or not, well, when all's said and done, we still own the business, so that's okay. So what's in our interest is this thing has to work well. So the big picture for us is it has to work well, and we believe working well means whatever you think is the right way to do it, you're probably wrong, because you're guessing the future, and you don't have a crystal ball that's very good. So set up a culture in which always you look at what you're doing, you're willing to see if you're wrong, you're willing to admit you're wrong, and you're willing to change quickly. I used to say, if you really want to look smart, find your mistakes before the other people do, and you'll really look smart. Don't be like the president. Everybody knows this guy is wrong. He's the last guy to figure it out. He doesn't look smart. So don't do that. Be quick to change. I brought notes, but I didn't bring any glasses, so, so it's almost like, ah. Let me give some examples. Oh my God, there's glasses. Let me see if there's anything sensible that I've written down. Ooh. Well, I could give a little history at digital. I mean, here were people who weren't businessmen. We were getting into the field we didn't invent. It was scanning probes. A lot of other people were in it. The story always was, gee, you're lucky you didn't have any competition. If you consider Seiko and Hitachi and Nikon and all the microscope makers in the world no competition, that's really good. But if you think they're competition, then I guess we had it. And our big picture was we're going to do well at what we do. We're going to make the best stuff that anybody makes, and everything flows from that. The marketing will be easy, the sales will be easy, everything will be easy. But we're going to make the best stuff. And again, we'll only make the best stuff, I think, if we have a culture in which we can follow a path in which what we think is the best stuff isn't the answer necessarily. And in fact, this whole field of scanning probe microscopes, if you really look at the history, nobody had any idea what this stuff was all the way along the way, or what it would be used for, or whether it would be valuable, or whether it would even see atoms. I mean, there was a whole surprise right there. So it was an interesting field in which everything in it was just a surprise. Hardly anything was right. And so it was good to be looking around. Let me give some examples. I won't go into detail, but we made these atomic force microscopes that vibrated a cantilever and tapped on the surface. But they also would go above the surface and look at magnetic forces, and so we had a magnetic force microscope. And we wanted to put a detector in for the magnetic force microscope that would measure the phase difference between what the cantilever is doing and what's driving it. And one of the guys made a phase detector, and it didn't work very well, and so the answer was, look, we got to get on with it. So my command was, to hell with it, let's get this thing put together, we don't need phase. Dan Bocek, who's an employee of mine, decided that was an odd thing to do, so he made a phase detector, although he was told not to. But in our culture, you could be told not to, but it didn't mean anything, all right? I mean, if you wanted to do it, you could go ahead and do it, and nobody was going to come and get angry. And nobody kept track of your time or your money or anything else. So anyway, he made a great phase detector, and we put it on the machine. Well, it turned out for magnetic force microscope, it wasn't useful. But strangely enough, we found out that while you're tapping the tip on the surface and you look at the phase, it measures the energy lost when you're tapping. So if you go across something like a polymer in which there are hard and soft spots, they really show up looking at phase. They don't show up looking at anything else. Could this have been part of a plan? Absolutely not. Nobody knew that phase was useful doing this microscopy, and we wouldn't have known unless we had it. And so one had to have somehow had access to it without it being part of a plan. So it's part of this poking around that, why are you doing that? I don't know, but maybe there's something there. And so luckily Dan knew how to make a phase detector, something like that. We were lucky. It was a big improvement to our instrument. The same story with the tapping, which came about by accident. Actually, Dan was involved in that. Were you involved in that? So you did everything. So we're lucky. See, we're lucky we have smart people. There was this non-contact microscopy, which I looked at the literature, and as far as I could tell, it didn't work. One guy published papers. Remember, academics can publish papers which are completely wrong. And the only reason they're publishing them is that it looks better on their resume. And the thing is wrong. And what's worse is they'll take a wrong article and then submit it with different titles. So they'll have several wrong articles. You know that. You can get by with that crap. So it looked to me like everyone else tried it. It didn't work. So I kept the guys away from it forever. But finally, somehow IBM, we had to deal with them, and we finally had to try it. So Dan comes in and says that tapping, that non-contact's really easy. We we tried it, and it works really great. And I said, damn, I was wrong. And I kept you guys away from it for 1 or 2 years. And then someone else came in and pointed out a detail, and I said, wait a minute, that's not non-contact. So I go back and ask these guys, what do you're supposed to oscillate at a nanometer. I said, how much you oscillating, Dan? Well, we don't know, we just turn it up. Well, it's like a fraction of a micron. It's hundreds of times more than they should be doing. I said, oh my God, it's clear. The thing's hitting the surface is what it's doing. Bang, bang. So Dan called it the hammer mode, which we had to change before we sold anything. But anyway, that's how tapping came about. So here's an interesting case. Here's a case where one knew the answer, you were right, and nonetheless you still screwed it up. Because you kept the guys away from discovering something by claiming you're right, don't try it. And it's a little hard to plan stuff like that. You can't plan stuff like that. So yeah, if you're doing something new, one has to realize that as you get into the future of something new, you'll learn things that you couldn't have known at the beginning. Therefore, planning is of no, I wouldn't say no value. You have to do something, but you have to realize that whatever you're doing is probably wrong. So I think that's important. Let me get back to business and management. I was always surprised about people running businesses because they were so mediocre, and that's the one thing I always said that was nice, is that luckily our competition are completely mediocre, except they all turn out that way. And one of the things, if you don't own much of your company, the highest priority you have as a president is to feel important. That's what you go in to do every day, is to feel important. And so you've got a staff, you fly first class, you stay in nice hotels, you do all this stuff, you feel important. And whether the company does well, that's somebody else's fault. We merged with a company, Vico, and what was interesting is the president would come out from New York, he would he would fly first class, stay at the Bacara, have a hands-on meeting where they would rent the theater out, the big box, to tell people what? We're going to fire a bunch of you. What? If you wouldn't have flown first class and stayed at the Bacara, blah, blah, you wouldn't have had to fire so many people. But anyway, it was important for him to feel like he was the boss, and he was important, and that's life. But a lot of them do that, and so you'll see it in the news a lot. I mean, all these guys who are executives getting paid a lot, they're mediocre, and they get paid to feel important. That's about it, and they don't do a good job. The guys, by the way, that do the good job, look, there's Google and there's Microsoft and there's job. They don't care about their pay. Why? They own part of the company, and their success is in doing well, not feeling important. It's interesting, actually. I noticed in the science and the science and engineering console, I saw an advertisement for a talk, but down at the bottom it said, I don't know why I'm on this, down at the bottom it said, business casual, no denim allowed. So that means all the guys from Microsoft and Google, these places couldn't come to the talk if they were here in town. And none of us could have came to the talk. So here's a rule that says, oh, by the way, you guys don't come to the talk because you're not business people. You don't look important. Here was another odd example, and it has to do with the plan. I was at a physics meeting somewhere, Indiana. It was in the winter, it was horrible. But anyway, the night before the session started, I walked by this room and it says, physics gets down to business. And I said, gee, that sounds interesting. I'll go in and listen to this talk. And there's a very distinguished guy in a suit, of course, telling what these graduate students, what you do when you're in business, because, of course, graduate students don't know about business. And he doesn't. And it had to do with what you do at all levels. And basically at all levels is you followed the plan. Maybe the top guys designed the plan, but the rest, everybody executed the plan. You would execute it differently at different jobs. And I pointed out to the guy that you just gave a great recipe for running a mediocre business, doing mediocre things with mediocre people. And of course, at this time, the crowd was not on my side. Apparently you're not supposed to pick on speakers like that. But the guy outraged me, and finally I grabbed a sheet from a guy beside me to find out who this speaker was. This speaker was the vice president of Xerox. Here's a company that screwed up everything by following the plan. The plan, by the way, was to make copiers. In their hands was all of the computer business. In their hands. But they followed the plan. And here's a jerk who's a vice president, who's part of that responsibility, telling people how to do business. What a bunch of crap. At the American Physical Society meeting, they'll ask anybody to talk. Anyway, the plan. If those people at Xerox would have spent some really small fraction of what they spend their money on to continue the computer business, they would have learned lots of stuff. Instead, Jobs comes in, and the people doing it are happier than hell to give him this stuff because he seems interested. And the guys in New York don't seem to care about this stuff at all. So they gave it away. Truly amazing. It isn't that hard to open your eyes up and say, copiers, well, maybe, anyway. Here's an example of the downside. After we merged with Vico, we used to do an inventory in which it was sort of visible inventory. There were a lot of people going into the parts, the engineers, the production guys, and if somebody noticed the parts were getting to be small in number, they would put it on a chart and order some parts. And we probably carried too much inventory because the downside would be if we ran out of a part. So we'd have lots of stuff, especially the cheap stuff. I mean, put a lot of it in there. And the problem, of course, is when we changed the product, we'd throw all that stuff out. But we marked up probably parts by a factor of 10 when we sell an instrument. So it was not a big deal. But some cost accountant inside of Vico decided that if you could keep the inventory down, you would make money doing that, because there's interest you see on the inventory. I mean, let's say there's 10% interest on the inventory. So you could save 10% of, let's say, half the inventory because you're carrying twice too much. But we mark up the inventory by a factor of 10 when we sell it. So it turns out, when all is said and done, you could add 1/10% to the cost of an instrument and make up for this saving money on the inventory. And so $100,000 would go to $100,000 and $100. I don't think anybody would have noticed it. So you didn't have to, but no, the cost accountant doesn't know about that stuff. All he knows is you can save money. So he's going to do it anyway. If you want to keep track of the inventory, you have to build a fence around it, because there are people coming in and taking this stuff. So you build a fence around it. And if you build a fence around it, you need a storekeeper, and the storekeeper now gives out the parts, and when he does it, there's a line of people now standing there trying to get the parts. Smart people don't like standing in lines to get parts, especially when they used to be able to go in and just grab a part. And so right away, the downside is you've already started to get into the culture of the business, is that people who are lazy would rather stand in that line than work. And so you all of a sudden have switched it over to you now attract lazy people who will stand in that line all day. And that's not good if you want smart people around. The other problem is that engineers used to come in on weekends. Sergey, in fact, would never go home. And they would go in, and if they were working on something, and I don't know whether Dan did phase on a weekend or not, because he was worried that I'd come in and yell at him, he has to have access to the parts. Well, they don't have access to the parts anymore on weekends, so engineers don't come in on weekends anymore, even if they have a good idea. This is really bad now. I mean, I don't know how much that costs, but it costs a lot. So here's a case where somebody was trying to save money, but the downside is that you're affecting the culture of the business. And my guess would be that if you ever turn it into dollars, which you can't, you have to compare apples and oranges in business. There are no oranges and oranges. Is that that thing costs 10 times what it saved, easily. There was an interesting story about Hewlett at Hewlett-Packard. He was in on a weekend trying to do something. He was sort of a hands-on guy, and he went to the storeroom. It was locked, and he found a fire axe or something like that and ripped the door down, left a note behind, "No more locked storeroom, Hewlett." So they paid attention to him. Let me give a strange thing I've seen about the big picture. It has to do with buying real estate. And I've been in Santa Barbara since '66. It turns out if you've been in Santa Barbara since '66, it's a fairly well-known fact that real estate goes up. Okay, that's about all you have to know, is that real estate goes up. But that's not what people do when they buy real estate. I looked at a house in Hope Ranch on 7 acres, and it was sort of a nice house, except the kitchen was old, especially the sink. I didn't like the sink at all. And there's no way I'm going to give you $42,000 for this damned house. And luckily I had a lesson like that which sticks in my brain. Don't ever look at the sink again and decide that this makes any difference in the buying of a house. But people do that. I remember looking at another house in Montecito, and it was back in the old days again when a fancy house cost $100,000. There was a new fellow who had been hired on the faculty in the math department, and I sort of knew of his name. I didn't, but he was there at the same time looking at the house because he needed a house in Santa Barbara. And he asked the realtor, "Does the refrigerator go with the house?" Guess what the realtor said? No. I would have said, "How many refrigerators do you want? Do you want a washer and dryer too?" We'll get and so people get into these strange things when it comes to real estate, and I must say, if people would have learned just to ignore all that and say, "Yeah, I'll take." I always claim my dog could have made tons of money if I would have said, "Bark when you see a good one," and it would have all worked out. Would have made a fortune. So. I bought something that was called a Solvang Outlet Center. I'm not into commercial real estate, but when I discovered it, it was selling for a quarter of what it cost to build it 5 years earlier because it was empty. And it turns out people who buy commercial property want income. And if it doesn't have income, they have no idea how to value it. But it's easy to value something that's being sold at a quarter of what it costs to build in a growing part of California, and the answer is buy it. Couldn't find one person that would say buy it, except the realtor, but he was getting a cut. And then after you do that, a couple of years later, gee, how smart you were for buying that. What? Anyway. My last example is licensing. We used to license from UC and Stanford at the same time. And there was really a difference. UC was in sense would squeeze money out of you. It started out a deal that was never thought to be worth anything, but then it got into the millions of dollars in licensing fees. And as it got more, the word would come from UC, "We think you should pay on more things." And I used to have a philosophy in business that if you set the rules, I'll play the game, but don't ever bitch about the rules, okay? They're your rules. And so if you tell me you should pay on more things, then the rule is you want more money, which means my rule is I want more money. It's that simple. So we started paying on less things. And so it was always a battle. At Stanford, though, it was easy going. I mean, the guys were really easy, and I had a conversation with a licensing guy one time, and I said, "You must do a lot of work with Hewlett-Packard, because those guys went to school there." He said, "They won't license anything from us." He said, "The guys are so tight, they won't do it." "Oh, but by the way, we get a lot of money from David Packard, so we really don't give a damn." And then later, I talked to the same guy, and he said, "We just changed our policies. We used to have a rigid policy, absolutely no stock in startup companies. We want real solid cash." And he said, "This has only cost us $100 million so far." And so we changed the policy, and I just read about a month ago, Stanford just sold $300 million worth of Google stock. They made the money back. and they make it, I think, by being easygoing and being friends of people who might be successful, because that's going to pay off. it turns out, rather than saying, because people will remember if you try and squeeze money. If they try and squeeze money out of you, when you're successful, you remember that. Bill Gates remembers Harvard, for instance, and I don't think they get a dime. Everybody else gets the money. I think you need to do that with your employees too, though, I think. You don't try and eat things out of them, and you need to do it with your customers. One of my sayings was, sell it for more than it costs, but less than it's worth. And people say, less than it's worth? And I say, yeah, I think you want the customer to come back and say, you know, that thing I bought from you is worth more than I paid. Worth more than I paid. Well, we want it to be that way. But it's also true, it costs a hell of a lot more than it costs us to build. That's okay. It's still worth more than I paid. And so I think you want to, in management, make sure that you're doing things with customers and employees such that you're treating them fairly, but not fairly in the sense you gave them a big title and lots of money, because I never paid anybody crap. Dan knows that. But the freedom and to do what you want, not do what you want, but at least the freedom and the responsibility to be self-correcting, which is important. By the way, if you don't know that the plan is right or wrong, everybody doing the work has to be given the freedom to be self-correcting. Otherwise, if they're working under instructions, they'll keep doing the wrong crap forever and keep saying, you know, my boss is stupid, but I'll just do it anyway. And that kills a company. So anyway, be fair with people. We didn't have titles, except Jeff, my son. We let him make his own business card. He liked the name Senior Director. He thought that was cool. But he was a Senior Director of Nano Indentation. And I used to tell people, he has one guy working for him who's old, and that makes him a senior director. So that's it. And what people didn't realize that, you know, it's all a joke inside digital. There are no titles that mean anything because people didn't have titles. And one of our toughest things when we merged, they said, give us an organization chart. And we did a chart, and everybody bitched about it. He's my boss? How come my square isn't above his square? I said, so we had to tell the guys, we don't have an organization chart, sorry. People didn't know who the bosses were. So anyway, but the biggest part of the big picture is, and it has to do with you can't know what you're doing, is that if you really get involved in planning and all that, realize really, and if you can accept it as being really true, is that you can't guess the future very well. You'll be a lot better off if you make that a belief that you have. Not that means you don't do anything, but it means that you do things and keep your eyes open and have smart people around who have eyes and look at stuff. And so that's about it. That's all I know.
Actually, Virgil, you oftentimes have strong feelings about the Office of Technology Transfer, you know, at UC. I suppose I put you as Lord and Dictator right now, and you're going to set up an office in a licensing process for licensing technology to these people who are developing technology. What would you do?
I don't know. I would go talk to the Stanford guys some more and see how they do. Or maybe they have smarter graduates coming out of Stanford. But I have a feeling their culture, see, it's the culture of the university. Do you have people coming out who would like to even start a business? And I think Stanford somehow is way ahead of UC in that case. And then if they're going to start a business, if you look back at your history, all you would get out of licensing would be from the great successes. So you really would have to do it in a way, and I hope you'll be successful and we'll get something out of that. But again, the squeezing part, it wouldn't work. And so I remember when we first started in the business and wanted to license this one thing, mainly to get a relationship with the university, because see, I was accused of stealing crap from the university, and that's why I quit. It was petty. It was so petty that would I ever get angry? No, I wouldn't get angry. But it turns out it was good because it did get me to quit. So I give the university compliments for that.
Without criticizing the university, if that's possible.
No, but he was the licensing, and I got this letter back that said, all things being equal, we prefer a California company. Here's a university run by the state of California. It turns out our employees' state income tax would have completely swamped all the royalties we would have ever paid. What do you mean, all things being equal, we prefer a California company? You mean you'd license the Japanese if they'd up the royalty rate? And the answer was, yeah, we'd do it with the Japanese, and we don't really care about California companies. So their big picture is pretty small. It was, how can we get the most money? Whereas if you're a university run by the state of California, then I think you have to ask, as part of the licensing department, what's healthy for the state of California? And I would guess, as far as licensing goes, Stanford does more for the state of California than UC does. And I know that might be wrong. But that's because I don't like UC's license. I don't know. You can't ask me how I would start something if I haven't looked into it.
You've thought about it, though.
I've thought about it, and I just remember that to make the customer angry is not the way you do business. That's all I know.
I had a question. You said you don't like planning, but you have to plan to some extent. So what would be the extent of planning? Just setting a general direction and saying, we think we want to go this way, and feeling your way as you go? Or could you elaborate?
I don't mind planning, but what I think is really important is that you don't, when you've done your planning, believe that it's right. That's the mistake. Planning means you need to get a starting point. That's fine. But don't believe that that's going to be the end point. So, for instance, we went into business to make electronics for scanning tunneling microscopes because we thought people, actually it was as bad as this, we were going to do digital control because we didn't have any idea what direction it was going to go, and we wanted something you could program overnight and change it. So that was our flexibility. But it turns out people weren't building the microscopes. And so we said, oh, God, we're making electronics for nothing. So we had to make the microscopes, too, you see. So that plan started to fall apart right away. And then the atomic force microscope came along, which sort of changed everything, and people didn't know it was going to do that. And that changed the plan. But we had this digital system that you could put it on and reprogram it. So, hey, we can do it, even if it isn't worth anything. And so I think I don't have anything. People think I'm against starting out. I'm not against starting out. You got to start somewhere. But what I found very powerful is to truly believe that there's so many ways this could go. You couldn't possibly have picked the right way. You couldn't possibly have done it. And the problem is you get into it, you learn so much that you couldn't have known it at the start, you see. So what does this planning mean? It's not based on this new knowledge all the time. And I think people who get really serious about the plan ignore any new knowledge at all because it's not the plan. And so that's a real danger. You have to be really lucky to follow a plan that you've thought about all the way to the end and actually have something that's worthwhile, I think. So it's the watching, I think, and being very critical of what you're doing. And this crap about no negative input, I'm sorry, that's all we would spend our time doing. What's wrong today? What are we doing wrong? And I thought that was positive thinking because we're trying to find out what we're doing wrong. That's pretty positive, isn't it?
Outside of microscopes, are there any ideas that you didn't get to follow when you were with digital instruments? And what were they, and has anyone else gone with it?
We sort of felt that we had to cover all parts of scanning probe microscopy, and my fear, when it was a competitive one, we don't want anybody else to learn this business. We were good enough that we're not going to allow a crack anywhere where you can sneak in and learn this business. because when we see you sneaking in, we want to kick you somewhat. And so we would try and cover all fields without ever saying this is a good field, this is a bad field. There was one exception, and there was something called a near-field optical microscope, and somehow you could get really high resolution by scanning this optical fiber over something. There was absolutely nothing I could see in the literature which proved that that was worth a crap. And so the decision was we are not going to do near-field. The customers wanted it, and they'd pay for it. But again, if you're going to teach your customer right, you're not going to sell him something that you know doesn't work. Sorry, I don't care if you have the money, we won't sell it to you because it doesn't work and you're going to get mad. It turns out Vico now sells such devices because I don't think they really care. Because the customer has money, so take his money. But anyway, that's the idea. We were going to wander off to some other businesses, and you know, I woke up and said, aren't we doing pretty good at what we do? This would be stupid to do something else. Besides, the field kept growing. And we were lucky to be in a good field. That it was possible to make it a useful field. That was good.
Coming back to your, you saying you want to keep the whole field covered. When you have like a company that's the size now of, you know, Vico, wouldn't it make sense to just have other people do the, you know, the grunt work for you that are small, flexible, maybe even get some government funding, and then just once it's done, soak it up?
What do you? How do you measure the size of a business?
The things that you described as being, you know.
Well, you said when you're as big as Vico, so I want to know what...
If you're dealing with...
I don't know how to interpret this word big. I want to know how you measure...
If you have these company structures that seem to come with being part of a large company that you just criticized, wouldn't you then want to get the help from small outside companies and people that can do just things more flexible, faster, cheaper, and then, you know, you just take the benefit?
Boy, you're asking me really to say nasty things, aren't you? But I'm going to stay away from it. No, I wanted to get. I like the comment about big, because when people would ask me how big is your business, I said we got 100,000 square feet, and they said, no, I don't mean that. And I said, well, what do you mean? Employees? I said, what if I go to hire twice as many employees tomorrow? Will I be bigger, or will I be smaller? And it turns out, my estimation, are smaller. And well, finally we would get like fourth choice down to how much profit do you make? And I said, now you're getting close. Now you're measuring the size of the business, because is it successful, or are you just wasting your time? And I just wanted to point out that Vico Scanning Pro business is smaller than what it used to be. The way I measure it. Okay, that's just a random gripe. Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
You have to talk up, because I'm old and I can't hear what
Okay. So, you seem like you're very successful, but bigger than life. What was your spark? What was your drive? Like, at a very young age, what was it that drove you to become a very passionate individual? Like, what was it? And your future plans as of from today?
No, I think not. I started out to be a machinist, it turns out. I went to a technical high school, learned machine shop, graduated to mechanical engineer, not a master's degree, but a bachelor's. Oh, and then we graduated again to physics. And I think the sad part of my life was when I was here on the faculty is that I was a mediocre physicist, and it makes you feel bad. You shouldn't be in a spot where you're mediocre. And so I think any enthusiasm I had for doing stuff came in the business, where we finally started doing things where we did it really well. And I think once you start doing stuff really well, you can then feel good. And you can actually even go out and mouth off at meetings and stuff like that, you know. And people find it hard to criticize you because I'm sorry, we're doing well and you're not, so who cares? So this came late. I was glad to get out into business and be able to look back, to tell you the truth. And that's where I think people, there are very few people that give up tenure, and getting out of that made me realize it's a trap. There are people trapped in tenure. They might as well be in a jail cell because they'll never get out, and because they don't want to get out, and they won't have the chance to see what an interesting world is. There are people out there who are crooks and shysters, and you never meet those guys on campus. They're out there in the real world. So life becomes much more interesting. Yeah.
Any comments on MSI in physics?
Nobody in here knows what MSI is.
Marine sciences.
Oh, do I know?
The marine sciences.
Oh yeah, I forgot. We started a program in physics because we thought the Ph.D. program was going to die, and so it was called Masters in Scientific Instrumentation, in which we considered instrumentation to be anything and everything. I mean, whatever. And learned a lot about education, and it was the start of this philosophy I have, which I had well before digital, that you can't know what you're doing, is that by accident we started to get into projects instead of these fixed labs that we were going to do. We got into projects because the National Science Foundation's money was late and the labs weren't ready, and so we had to do something. And then when we got the labs, we noticed the guys doing projects, and it was sort of independent of what the project is, but they would learn a lot faster than people doing labs in which you would read instructions and follow instructions and all that stuff. And it finally became clear that education was learning how to function, and everybody was different. Everybody had different skills, different this, different that. You could go ask people how to solve your problem. That was okay. You could do whatever you want as long as get your project to work. And it was this functioning that people had to learn about. And so education then became, the facts don't make any difference. It's the function. It's getting used to functioning that made a difference. And that became the program. And as you could tell, that fit in the university like a piece of crap. And so it was a program that was sort of a sore on the physics department. And we had a lot of good graduates, some of which are in this room today, and I thought we did a good job educating. But again, and one of my complaints about the university, if you talk about educating students, you're talking about number 5 on the list. It's way down. I don't want to tell you students that, but it's true. If you don't bring in research money, and if you don't have prestige, and let's see.
Let me put you on the
blah blah blah. And when they're
let me put you back on the spot again, Virgil.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're a moderator.
Yeah.
You have to moderate.
You're Lord and Dictator again, and now you're going to be designing a laboratory experience for the University of California. Hundreds and hundreds of students have to go through it. Maybe they shouldn't, but how do you do it? How do you set it up differently than the way that you're criticizing?
I don't think, it turns out Americans are supposed to be innovative. Everybody talks about it, and I was always wondering, where is this innovation helped or taught inside the university? I've noticed no courses in it, and how do you really do innovation? Well, now you've got a bunch of students who are all different, so this grading starts to fall apart. How are you going to grade teaching innovativeness and stuff like that? And so you have to tear down a lot of the things that you're used to doing, like treating everybody the same, having grades, doing all that. Let me give you an example. Jeff went to UC San Diego, and one thing that truly appalled me, they have a project course, in which I think they learned a lot, but of course it wasn't run by regular faculty because they don't like to do project things. So it was some guys from Hewlett-Packard. But anyway, the idea was to have this robot control, this remote control device that would drop 5 ping pong balls in an elevated hole. But at the same time, your competitor was over there doing his, and so you could run over and smash his thing, or you could do it. You could be defensive or offensive. And so a week before, I'll misrepresent this, Jeff, but that's okay. A week before the final, they had a practice. Well, Jeff's group made this car that split into 2 pieces. One went over and blocked the other guys.
You couldn't go to the other side to fight unless all your balls were in all the holes. So anything that was offensive was useless unless all 5 balls were in all 5 of your holes.
Yes.
So we had nothing offensive. We just made a big brick that broke into 2, dropped the balls, and parked in the corner. No fighting. So.
How did you stop the other guys?
Sorry.
So we stopped the other guys by parking in the corner, and so it was not exciting to watch. Everyone wanted to fight, and they could never fight. We didn't allow anyone to fight because we broke into 2 parts. They couldn't get our part off from dropping the balls, so it was completely boring. And then they changed the rules.
But you were winning. And the answer was in this course on innovation that one of the big mistakes inside of a university is to be too innovative. And so they changed the rules. And so they gave them a week to redo their whole.
No, they changed the rules of the competition.
They taught him how to not be innovative. What a great course.
Yeah. Then it was worse. They confiscated our project. We were given $200 and we used the school budget to buy our remote control car parts because we wanted to race remote control cars after the project. And somehow we mouthed off to the teachers and told them that. And so as soon as it was done, they said, we want your project, and which they told us we can keep the budget and keep all the stuff we bought. So it just went bad.
So the lab would not be that one.
Like son.
The lab would not be that one. No, I mean, my advice to Jeff is, luckily real life doesn't work that way. When you kick the guy's ass, guess what? You kick their ass. And it stays that way. So, yeah, it was sad to see. But anyway, I think you have to do, I think you learn from the projects, which is nice. Well, another, for instance, Jeff's been involved in this, what do they call it, Jeff? The robotic?
DARPA Grand Challenge?
Yeah, the DARPA Grand Challenge. And I think that the way it came about is that people were giving Carnegie Mellon a lot of money. DARPA was. Things were a little slow. And some bright guys said, let's have a contest. Let's let everybody enter. Well, the year before last, nobody got anywhere. But this last year, people finally got their act together. And then even Carnegie Mellon, after millions and millions of dollars, still got beat by Stanford.
Yeah.
And Jeff's car went off at 30 miles. Lost its brain. But anyway, these projects are really important. You learn a lot faster if you do this. But how do you do the grading? Well, these guys had a grade, finish, and and we'll give you $2 million. Well, that's a big deal. And so I don't know how in a university you can do that without requiring a huge amount of time by somebody to set up an environment where people will be doing different things. If they have to have a grade, it'll be graded, God only knows how, just on how you feel about how people are doing, and stuff like that. For instance, nobody knew about it, but we didn't have any finals in the MSI program, and I think it was against university regulations to give out grades without finals.
Broke another rule.
Nobody was watching. We used to have a guy who was an interesting guy. He came out of Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, Mr. Ng, NG. We made sure that on everything he made, we always said, put your name in big letters on it, NG. He never did know what that meant. This guy learned how to take tests. He had a 4.0 out of San Luis Obispo, and I kept telling my partner, who liked tests all the time, every time Ng would show up with the highest score, he said, that's proof, Dave. You shouldn't give tests. This guy doesn't know up from down, and he keeps getting the best score. He was horrible on project, but so So this innovation, I think it's projects. I think it's people being treated all separately because they are different, and somehow getting people to learn how to function, which means they're now coming to grips with their own skills, and all this stuff that they learn in books. They'll find out life is much more complicated than that, and they have to learn how to deal with that. So.
Well, not to pick on the project thing, but I work at City College on Tuesdays, and UCSB canned their whole ceramics department.
They did what?
They canned the whole ceramics division because it's
Why
not
are you
part of.
picking on UC?
It's
I
not
wouldn't
part of
do
fine
that.
arts, so they don't want anyone spinning pottery or doing anything with hands-on. They want it all to become courses.
The Laguna Blanca got rid of its shop too, Jeff. In the technical high school I went to that used to have all sorts of stuff, it's gone. Bye-bye. We don't do that stuff. We read books.
Actually, that's a good point also, because now at the University of California, for example, the mechanical engineers don't really spend a lot of time building stuff. And as you know, at MIT, you had the tradition there was that you would build things, and part of your project was actually going in the shop and milling and that kind of thing. It's really hands-on stuff. Is this a big problem in your mind in terms of educating or giving people experiences to see how to really make things and how to drive ideas for building and creating
I'm not
things?
sure it's the making things. I think people confuse these projects with, oh, isn't it like the machine shop I took? Oh, yeah, it's really nice to know how to run a lathe. No, I mean, that's not what we learn. We learn that if you're not careful and you use a lathe, you make a part that's a piece of crap, all right? And it's nice to learn that actually you have to be quite careful if you're going to. And I think in these other project courses, you learn again how to function yourself. And so the making is that, damn, this is harder than I thought. I have to learn how to function a little bit better. And so I think people misinterpret these technical kind of things as being you're learning a skill. What you're learning is to function, a big skill, which is to function on anything. Whereas reading a book and taking a test and getting 80%, I don't think you're functioning yet. And so yeah, all these shop things have now disappeared, and I think it's bad. The reason they're disappearing, it takes time to do this. Who's going to manage this thing where people are all mushing around doing different things? Unless it turns out it's a research thing for the professor, then it's tolerated. But if, let's say it's not for anything, it's just to do it. Dan, were you at the first robot wars? That should have started in academia. Instead, it started off on the side and became a big deal. And it was there were people. The first year, people learned that a fast wedge was a really great invention. You could knock anybody off their feet with a little fast. What was it called? La wedge.
La machine.
La machine. La machine.
It was in the intermediate class, and in the end they had a free-for-all, and just like all the robots in, it won that too.
Yeah.
All the heavyweight robots.
And so here's some people who learned some very important stuff, and then of course the next year it was all little wedges running around. But it's that kind of project where people learn a lot, but yet that was outside of academia. And it shouldn't have been. It should have been something which was a real war between campuses or something like that. See who was smarter.